Good morning. We are having a clinical case discussion today and an operative discussion. This will be presented by Dr. RM Jyoti. He is third year PGT at MR Mamur Hospital. And Dr. Sudev Shah is Professor and Head of Surgery at NRS Medical College. Will take us to the case scenario. Jyoti, you can start.
Good morning, sir. Today my topic is presentation of practice training. Myself, Dr. RM Jyoti, General Surgery PhD from MR Mamur Hospital. The patient of Mr. X, a 54 years gentleman, former male profession, residing at Calcutta, came to the hospital with cheek complaint of swelling below the left ear from since 5 years. History of illness. Patient was apparently well a few years back when he noticed swelling of small swelling in front of his left ear lobe. The swelling gradually increased in size over the past 5 years and attained a present size of approximately 5 to 4 centimeters, spanning the front and back and behind the ear lobe. No history of pain, fever, increase in size of swelling during children. No history of sudden increase in size of swelling. No history of difficulty in opening the mouth. No history of suggestion of facial involvement, such as difficulty in chewing food, difficulty in closing eyes, cleaning of saliva from angular mouth. No other swellings found in the opposite side of the opposite of face, scalp, floor of mouth, and neck. Coming to the past history, no history of major illness such as hypertension, diabetes, tuberculosis, and asthma. No history of any previous surgeries. Personal history, mixed sex, mixed diet, sleep pattern regular, uptake normal, addiction to smoker and alcohol since 30 years, bowel habit normal, blood bladder normal. Family history, married, live with 2 sons and wife. No history of similar complex family. Treatment history, patient has undergone recent epilepsy, has not used any drug for long. Allergic is no history of any allergic to drug or food. Coming to the summary, a 54-year-old gentleman presented with a painless swelling below the left ear lobe, slowly increasing of size at present of size approximately 5 to 4 centimeters, not associated with any pain. No history of any suggestion of any patient or palsy, no other swellings present in the neck.
Right. Okay. Dr. we can have some discussion on the presentation.
Yeah, sure. Now, can you go back to the previous slides?
It's a presentation.
So it is a history of 5 years and is then the present size of 5 into 4 centimeters, spanning the front, the back, and behind the ear lobe. Okay. Now, what did you ask the history of pain?
So, any history of pain because associated with any inflammatory signs like patient is having any stone or any there is an increase in the size of pain associated with the pain.
Do we have any other condition other than inflammatory swellings or calculus which might give rise to pain?
So if it's converting into malignant changes, patient may have pain.
Malignant changes, pain is very rare. Yeah, before that?
Calculus.
Calculus you have mentioned, I think. And other than that, any malignant swelling, as you said, can have pain. There is a certain group of swellings where the nerve is involved, right? So that can also have pain. What is that tumor? Yes. So in that condition, the nerves, we know there is a perineal involvement, and so that can cause pain. And why did you ask about sudden increase in size?
Sir, because it's a gradual to lower any malignant transformation of the swelling.
Yes. And what malignant transformation can occur in which swelling?
So if it is slowly growing tumor, converting to pleomorphic X.
Yes, pleomorphic adenoma, which is usually a benign condition, yes, in certain cases may turn malignant. Why did you ask about difficulty in opening the mouth?
Sir, if it is to rule out the local infiltration of the tumor into the temporomandibular joint.
No, more importantly, it is usually found in inflammatory swellings where you have a parotid abscess. So trismus is much more common in inflammatory swellings, right? Okay, next. Why do you want to know about facial nerve involvement?
Sir, it's to rule out any usually malignant in the involvement of facial nerves?
Yeah, first, basically because the facial nerve gets into the parotid gland, right? So any malignancy, or in other words, the hallmark of malignancy in a parotid swelling is facial nerve involvement, right? And why do you want to know other swellings, scalp, face, floor of the mouth, neck, etc.?
So if whether it's bilateral swellings or any other swelling, whether it's to rule out any tumor in the primary sites, metastatic to the.
Yes, number one is yes, you want to know whether there are metastases either in the lymph nodes. And you were talking something about bilateral swellings. What is that? I mean, where do you find bilateral swellings? In
benign conditions, in inflammatory conditions like viral keratitis, you get mumps keratitis, and in case of benign Watkins tumor.
Your voice is not very clear on my side. I don't know why. Anyway, yes. Bilateral.
Bilateral swellings. So, is it okay, sir? Bilateral swelling like parotiditis conditions in initial stages, there is bilateral swelling. In benign tumors like Watkins tumor, there will be bilateral swelling.
Yes, in Watkins tumor, there is a chance that it can be bilateral in a certain number of cases. Yes, that's right. Okay, next. Okay, why you have mentioned in addiction, smoker, alcoholic, anything special about smoking?
So Watkins tumor are more common in the
smoker. More common in smokers. Yes, there is a definitive association between Watkins tumor and smoking. That's right. Okay, next. The patient has undergone a recent FNAC, has not used any drug for a long time. What drug are you after?
So any comorbid conditions like hypertension, diabetes.
Or you mean whether there is any drug history or not? Okay. Yes. Next. Now let us come down to your provisional diagnosis.
So as the swelling is in the painless progressive swelling, and
no, she can complete the examination part.
Okay. No.
I mean the diagnosis based on the history.
Yes, not on that.
Yeah. Yes, based on the history, what do you think?
So as it is a slow growing tumor, painless swelling, and maximum usually I'm suspect, and it's site of the swelling in the parotid region. So I'm suspecting tumor arising from the parotid region. Most probably benign because it's a slow growing from last 5 years.
Okay, you want to finish off the examination part?
Yeah, and one thing is regarding the facial nerve palsy. She said no difficulty in chewing. So my point is, what nerve supplies the muscles of mastication?
Yeah, mastication. Yeah,
trigeminal nerve. So how does facial nerve get involved? That there is some difficulty in chewing. Yes, there is some difficulty in chewing, but what is the explanation?
So patient can't able to hold the food from vestibule in the oral cavity.
So that is done by whom?
Orbicularis.
No.
Vaccinator.
So vaccinator is not a direct muscle of mastication, but it helps in mastication by pushing the food from the visual mouth in between the alveolus. So if the vaccinator is paralyzed, the food gets accumulated. It's not exactly chewing difficulty, but food is getting accumulated in the visual mouth because of vaccination. So you have to keep in mind that the muscles of mastication are supplied by trigeminal, mandibular division, but vaccinator is a muscle which helps in chewing. Good. Otherwise, she has covered the history part well.
Yes.
Examination.
Coming to general examination with proper consent in broad daylight, maintain privacy and hand hygiene. Patient is alert, conscious, cooperating, oriented, time-based and person, well-built and well-nourished, weight 67 kg, height 170 centimeters, BMI 22.2. There is no signs of dehydration. Kelnowski performance score was 90. No pillar, no uterus, no cyanosis, no clotting, no pillidema, no general lymphadenopathy. Coming to vital signs, pulse rate 7 to 4 minutes, regular rhythm, normal volume, and blood pressure 128 mmHg in right upper arm in supine posture. and temperature 90 degree respirated 40 per minute. Coming to the local examination, on inspection, a solitary ovate swelling of size approximately 5 into 4 centimeters situated in the left parotid region, extending superiorly till the level of tragus, inferior to the angle of mandible, anterior 2 centimeters in front of the left earlobe, and posterior to the retromandible. Surface appears smooth and borders are well defined, and swelling is split in the left earlobe upwards and outwards, and retromandibular groove is obliterated. Overlying skin appears normal, small scar present to suggest of recent deficiency, no facial deformity or asymmetry noted. With clinical picture showing the and palpation, no local leather temperature, no redness, all findings are confirmed. A solitary globular swelling of size approximately 5 centimeters with common consistency, well defined margins. Patient swelling is mobile in both horizontal and vertical directions, and no pattern sign is positive, and no swelling is not fixed to and overlying skin or underlying deep structures like masseter. Examination of oral body, mouth opening normal, parotid opening normal, no discharge, no middle displacement of tarsal fossa or soft palate or dubla. Examination of facial nerve, no facial asymmetry noted, and for examination of arboretum look like front belly of occipital busnatal, levator on levoris and patis are normal. Examination of temporomandibular joint, mouth opening is normal and movements are normal. Examination of cervical, no palpable cervical lymph nodes. Other systemic examination is cardiovascular system, S1 is audible, no audible sounds audible. Respiratory system, bilateral vesicular system, moderate sounds, CNS within normal limits, GI soft, non-tender, and normal family. Coming to summary of the case, a 54-year gentleman presented painless swelling below the left ear lobe, slowly increasing of size approximately 5 into 4 centimeters, no associated pain, no history suggestion of any facial or palsy, and no cervix felt in the neck. On examination, general surface was found to be normal, essentially normal. Found a swelling in the left parotid region of 5 into 4 centimeters with smooth surface, well-defined margins, free from skin and underlying structures. There is no figures of suggestion of diploid involvement, facial nerve, and no palpable lymph nodes in the neck. Coming to the provisional diagnosis, left side parotid tumor in a 55-year-old male, probably benign in origin, probably pleomorphic.
Now, what is that scar due to?
Some local irritant, because he undergone FNH after that he applied some irritant.
Okay. Okay, next. Yes. Now, examination of the oral cavity. Now, basically what you have done is mouth opening normal, parotid duct opening normal, no discharge, no middle, but this can be included in the inspection part of the examination, right? Number one. Number two, now there are some people who would like you to palpate appreciate the deep part of the gland. But what I think is that for palpation, or if you want to put your finger inside the mouth and look for the deep part, that is actually not possible in an outdoor setting, right? So for that palpation, you can definitely palpate, but in that case, you have to anesthetize the area. You have to use some kind of a local anesthetic spray, because otherwise the patient will not allow it, right? The gag reflex will be activated, and in that case, you will get no information. And basically in the process, you will lose the confidence of the patient. So you are absolutely correct. This part can easily be included in the inspection part of the examination. Yes, how do you test for orbicularis oculi?
Sir, I will ask the patient to close the eyes. If he can able to close the eyes, it's okay. If, after closing the eyes, if I'm trying to open the eyes, if it is easily opening, there is...
Yes, you have to try and open the eyes against resistance. Yes, that's right. Okay. Yes, next. So as we have already said that this patient, I mean, he has basically no complaints, right? Other than the swelling itself. Okay, fine. Now, so why do you want to do anything? I mean, why don't you let it be as it is? Because it is very, very slowly growing, isn't it? It has reached this size in the last 5 years, is it? Yes, 5 years or more. So why do you want to operate in the first place, or any surgical treatment?
So as there is risk of conversion of malignancy in the tumors and cosmetic purpose.
And
Cosmetic purpose.
yeah, basically it is cosmetic, right? Yes, the main thing is cosmetic, and the larger the tumor, more complicated the operation gets later on. Okay, that is something we have to make the patient appreciate, and then yes, make him agree to undergo an operation and removal of the gland. And definitely malignancy is a very valid point. Okay, so why do you think it is, as you said, a pleomorphic adenoma of the parotid?
So most common swellings in the parotid region are benign, and 80% of the tumors of benign tumors are pleomorphic typing of parotid.
So before that, I think I should have asked this question earlier, that why do you think it is a parotid tumor in the first place?
So first, the site of this tumor, so it's in the parotid region, and very swelling, unless improved, most of the swelling in the parotid region suspected to be parotid origin.
So what is the parotid region? Can you tell us?
Okay. So it is bounded anteriorly by the posterior border of ramus. It's bonded anteriorly by the posterior border of ramus of the mandible, and posteriorly by the mastoid process and sternocleidomastoid mastoid, and above by the zygomatic arch, and below by the
so what is the shape of this space?
Pyramidal shapes.
Pyramidal shape. Yes. How is it disposed? How is the pyramid disposed?
So with apex downwards and the base upwards, and
yes, the apex is downwards and the base is upwards. Okay. Now another thing, if you go back to your picture, now you see most parotid swellings are typically, they appear in this region, right? As you have shown. Okay. But as you already said, the parotid region, the base is upwards, right? Base is basically found by the base of skull, isn't it? Yes. So why is it that the parotid tends to present in this area? That is, it lifts up the ear lobule, and that is where it presents. It doesn't present somewhere else. You know, it could have started just below the zygomatic arch, or maybe somewhere else. Why is it so that it almost always presents at the ear lobule? It tends to lift it up. Why is it so? Yeah, the reason is because it is only at this area that the parotid region tends to be open, right? At all other areas, it is tightly closed. Okay, so that is the reason why it tends to appear here. Okay, next. Fine. So, as you said, 80% is due to pleomorphic adenoma. And what about the rest? So, which is pleomorphic adenoma is a benign condition, isn't it? Fine. What is the next possible diagnosis?
So what is adenolymphoma of the parotid?
Yes, adenolymphoma. Is it a malignant condition?
No.
It's not a malignant condition. Any special things about adenolymphoma?
So it usually occurs in the chronic smokers, bilateral occurs in the lower colon.
We have mentioned that it tends to be bilateral in a certain percentage of cases, and it is very commonly found with smokers. You are perfectly correct. Okay. Now, what malignant swellings can you find in the parotid region?
Sir, in the conversion of a pleomorphic malignant tumor, carcinoma.
No. You have to answer the commonest ones have to be answered first. Which is the commonest parotid swelling? Which is the commonest malignant parotid swelling?
Adenoid cystic carcinoma.
No. It is mucoepidermal. It is mucoepidermal. Right. Adenoid cystic, yes. The other one, what is that? Mucoepidermoid is the commonest parotid malignant swelling, and the commonest submandibular malignant swelling is adenoid cystic carcinoma. Right? Okay. I mean, they are very close, but that is more common in submandibular, and this is common. The books have mentioned that clearly. And this is more common with parotid. Okay. Now, what percentage of swellings in submandibular gland and in the other sublingual glands are malignant and benign? This is a statistics you will have to remember.
60% of the tumors in the submandibular gland are so, and 50% maximum sublingual glands have maximum malignancies.
That's
80% malignant.
Around 80%, yes. Okay. Next. Now, fine. Makunda, any one or two?
We have covered the examination part of it. So, and the justification of the diagnosis. One is a peripheral region, and the most common is the benign one. So, you can discuss about the management of this patient.
Okay, right away. So, how do you plan to manage this patient?
I want to confirm my diagnosis, and
How?
I'll go with the first to know the clinical extension by ultrasonography to know the site of the origin and the consistency and any other swellings in the neck of the region.
And you have to do an ultrasonography also at the same time. You can ask for a guided, yes, a guided biopsy, right? A needle biopsy which is guided. And previously, you know, FNEC was contraindicated in salivary tumors, especially parotid previously. Nowadays, the textbooks have also come up with core needle biopsy, right? They have allowed, I mean, people have agreed to it, and now even in textbooks, we'll find they're advising core needle biopsy. Of course, it has to be guided for parotid tumors. And there was a time in between when it was advocated that if you want to put in a needle, you have to put the needle in through the mouth, right? So even now that has been discarded because people were afraid of, starting up a parotid fistula. Anyway, so those days are gone. Now you can also go in for a core needle biopsy of a parotid tumor, provided it is under image guidance, right? Fine. Apart from that,
sir,
what else would you like to do?
So general investigations for the fitness assessing of the patient.
No, for the parotid. Yes, general investigation fitness, that is okay. That is besides the point. Now, for the parotid, do we need any other imaging? Other than ultrasound, as you have said?
Sir, as it is a benign tumor and there is no need for a further investigation.
I mean, you can consider another imaging, right? Either a CT scan or an MRI. Now, the reason is why. Why will you do it?
Sir, if he has deep lobe involvement, we are not.
That is, we are not very confirmed whether the deep lobe is involved or not. For that, some form of imaging in the form of an MRI. MRI is supposed to be better because you're dealing with soft tissues. You can undertake. And another reason is that, you know, I mean, in the present day, with MR spectroscopy and all those things coming up, they can tell you whether it is benign or malignant. I'm talking of parotid tumors in general, you know, not in this particular case, but where you have large tumors to deal with. In that case, they will also be able to tell you whether it is a benign condition or a malignant condition.
Dr. Shah, for a benign swelling of this nature, which is mobile and deep lobe is not showing to be clinically projecting,
ultrasound should be enough.
Normal, then we can skip CT or MRI for such benign tumor. But if there is suspicion of malignancy and you are dealing with malignant lesion, even if you don't find it's not fixed underlying structure, there has to be a next mode of imaging when you have suspicion of malignancy.
Yes, that is what I said, because for parotid tumors in general, right? When you're talking of parotid tumors in general, in that case, you will have to mention that. But when you're dealing with a small tumor in a particular case, in that case, you can avoid mentioning that.
Yes.
Okay, next what? So we have also, that means first is you confirm your diagnosis and then you can stage the disease, isn't it? Yes, staging, for this staging in certain cases, wherever you have a suspicion or when you have large tumors, you will have to put in a CT or an MRI. Okay, next proceed regarding treatment.
Sir, after completing my investigations and after general fitness of the patient, I will go for the surgical management of this patient, sir. Superficial conservative parodonectomy.
Superficial conservative parodonectomy. I mean, why
suddenly? You don't have the term conservative.
Yeah, exactly.
By definition is a conservative surgery.
Yeah, you can either say superficial or you can say suprafacial. Both are correct, right? So let us remove the term conservative. Okay. So we will go for a superficial or a suprafacial parotid rectum. Fine. And now, since we also have the operative part within our discussion today, what kind of anesthesia would you like to do in this patient?
So general anesthesia.
General anesthesia, obviously. And the position of the patient on the OT table?
So patient is supine with the head and neck extended, with sandbag between the shoulder blades, and head is rested on the head ribs, and head end is lifted 15 degrees above to reduce the venous convolutions. And patient faces turned to opposite side of the.
Yes, you have to turn the head to the opposite side and make sure that whichever side you are operating, that stays up, isn't it? Obviously, yes. Now let us come down to the incision.
So after dressing and draping, and a shaped cervicofacial mastoid incision is given. It starts below the zygomatic arch in front of the tragus and goes below the ear lobule and turning around the ear lobule, and then come.
And that is where it comes out with a lazy S.
Lazy S.
Right? Right. Do you have any slides showing that incision? No. It is sometimes referred to as
modified Blair's.
Modified Blair's incision. So whenever you say modified Blair, the examiner is tempted to ask that what is the modification to the original or the conventional Blair incision. Right, the conventional Blair incision, as you said, used to start at the tragus, come down along the ear lobule and go up and stay there. Right. So what Bailey had a modification. Bailey modified this Blair incision. It was done sometime in the 1940s, where he brought it down again onto the neck along one of the neck creases. So here one has to remember that wherever you tend to bring it down and then you make a curvature and then again bring it down again. So this area, now this area is an area where there is a problem with vascularity later on. So you make sure that it is just like an S and try to avoid any corners, right? That is very, very important. Okay. So you have made an incision and now
raising the skin flaps.
You will have to raise the skin flap because basically there's a single flap you have to raise. You have to raise a flap medially, right? Okay. So while raising the flap, what do you come across?
Sir, and
what structures you may come across while raising the flap?
So here while raising the flap in the cervical part, I'll come with the great outflow now, and while when coming to the anterior border of the parotid gland,
you will come across a nerve and you will come across, usually you will come across a vein. Right? Now the nerve is? Great auricular nerve. Right? Yes. Whose branch is it?
C2.
It is a branch of it is one of the superficial branches of the cervical plexus. Right? So this supplies an area covering the skin over the parotid region. It covers an area approximately that of your hand's breadth, right? In this region, that is what it covers. It supplies. And then you come across the retromandibular vein, right? Which is actually comes and forms the external jugular. Okay. Now you may find a thick vein going here, right? Going up to the parotid in this region. So what do you do with the vein?
So dissector and ligator and divides.
Yes. That is why I have asked this, because that is something you are not supposed to do. You are not supposed to divide the vein and ligate it, right? You keep it as it is. Why? Why will you not divide the vein?
It's as it is draining area of the venous drainage of the face, it may lead to venous convolution.
Venous drainage of the parotid now. And so basically, if you divide the vein, then the parotid becomes congested, right? Because very soon you will have to divide the parotid gland itself. So that is going to increase the bleeding from the parotid gland, right? So the most important thing is you should not do anything with the vein. Keep it as it is, and that will allow venous drainage because you don't need to. Because there's another reason why you don't have to do anything with the vein. That is because we have a plane which we have called the fasciovenous plane, right? or it should be better known as the fasciovascular plane, because not only the vein, there is an artery also there, right? So, and moreover, this vein or this vascular plane lies deep to the facial nerve. And we are not supposed to go anywhere deeper than the facial nerve. We have to stay at the level of the facial nerve, right? So since the vein is deeper to the facial nerve, there is no point why you need to do anything with the vein. Okay, proceed. Next.
After raising the skin flaps, anteriorly it is raised with the sharp dissection, then the subplatysmal plane, and anteriorly extends up to the anterior border of the parotid, and superiorly up to the zygomatic arch, and the posterior skin flap is started rising, and along the ear lobule is lifted up, and covering the it has to be done in that way. You have to know the upper border of sternocleidomastoid, mastoid process, and
Makunda, next time I think whenever you have an operative discussion, I think that better if we have some operative slides here. I mean, some pictures, because that is why we have something. There must be some reference to which we can talk to.
Okay.
Yeah, that is very important. Okay, so you will now. I think the next step is, as you said, we will have to
flap raise.
Flap raise. We have raised to a certain extent the anterior flap, and as you said, lift up the ear lobule and
to expose
the flap and fix it. The ear lobule also needs to be fixed with a skin suture, Fine. So now is the time when you have to identify certain muscles. The first muscle that it comes into view is the sternocleidomastoid. Absolutely correct. Again, then slightly deeper to sternocleidomastoid, you will have to find another muscle, that is the
posterior belly of digastric.
Posterior belly of digastric. Fine. So these two muscles have to be identified. Now, sternocleidomastoid is fine. It's a big muscle, right? Okay. So how do you identify the posterior belly of digastric?
So it is a.
Yes.
So as we go deeper beneath the sternocleidomastoid,
deeper to sternocleidomastoid, yes, the fibers have slightly different direction. The direction is basically the same, right? But in a slightly different angle. Yes, slightly different angle and the sternocleidomastoid. Okay, fine. And why is this muscle important? The posterior belly of digastric.
So facial nerve, sometimes facial nerve.
Because posterior belly of digastric is one of the most important muscles in this region, right? Because I mean, those who do neck dissection, they will be knowing that almost all structures, right? Almost all structures which go from the carotid triangle to the submandibular triangle, they are all going below this muscle. And what are the structures? Can you just name the important ones?
Posterior belly.
Both which go deep to the posterior belly of digastric. Almost all structures, as I said, go below the posterior belly of digastric. Both carotids, yes. The internal jugular vein,
and vagus,
which actually accompanies the internal carotid within the carotid sheath, yes, and
vagus,
and the last four cranial nerves, right? Not very difficult to remember. So both the carotids, the internal jugular vein, and the last four cranial nerves. Now, the most important thing is what goes superficial to this muscle.
Facial.
Yes. What are the structures which go superficial to this muscle? Right. So one is the retromandibular vein or its tributaries. Right. Number one. Number two, the branches of the facial nerve. Right. The branches of the facial nerve and the posterior auricular artery. It sometimes goes superficial to this. Anyway. Okay, so now in the second paper this time, there was a question which said that during operation, what are the structures or what operative things which will help you in reaching the facial nerve? There was a question of 10 marks. So how do you plan to answer that?
So first I will go with the antegrade or retrograde way. In antegrade way, first I have to identify the trunk of the facial nerve. And
listen, I have never seen anyone going the reverse way, because that is very dangerous, and it is just mentioned in the books as far as I can see. I'm sure Mapanda is going to agree with me, because it is very, very difficult, almost impossible to go the other way around. That you pick up the branches and then you go to the main trunk. I don't think that is at all possible, and maybe very dangerous. So this is the only way by which you first come to the trunk and then you go with the branches. Yes.
So what are the pointers to the trunk?
What are the pointers to, yes, exactly, that is the word. What are the pointers to the facial nerve?
tragal point, Conley's point, and the post and in front of the styloid process.
You have to explain what is triggers. What is the trigger pointer?
Say 1 centimeter deep to the tragal.
So what is that? The trigger point is junction of
bony and cartilaginous part of external tragal.
Yes. So as you lift the ear lobule, you find the cartilaginous part outward and the bony part inward. Junction of that. Number one. Number two, you find the styloid process. Trace it out. The point it enters into the base of the skull is that another point. And then posterior digastric. As you trace it medially, you reach the area of stylomastoid foramen. Okay. So these are the important points.
And here, one more thing I would like to add, because I mean, for an operator who is trying hard to find the facial nerve, because you know the facial nerve is actually very deep, right? Because all these points have been mentioned in the books. This is especially for a normal patient, right? When you are doing surgery in a patient who has a pleomorphic adenoma, now the larger the tumor, the more deep is the nerve, right? That is something you'll have to appreciate, right? Because when the tumor, mainly in the superficial part of the gland, increases in size, it basically tends to push the facial nerve more deeper, right? So when you have a parotid tumor and you're doing the operation, then the larger the tumor, the more deep you have to go to search and find for the facial nerve. That is something you have to remember. For a small parotid tumor in the superficial part, you will find the facial nerve in the perfectly normal position, or maybe just slightly deeper. But it is the other way around. If you are operating on a pleomorphic adenoma which is arising from the deep part of the gland, what will happen there?
As it is more larger, the facial nerve will come forward.
Yes, it will become more superficial. So that is the reason why it is very, very important beforehand to know whether you're dealing with a pleomorphic adenoma in the superficial part of the gland, or you're dealing with a pleomorphic adenoma in the deep part of the gland. Right? In the deep part of the gland, you expect to find the facial nerve very superficial.
Okay. And another thing is what you need to divide after the skin can be raised, what structure you need to divide to reach into this space.
So posterior border of the parotid gland and between the sternocleidomastoid.
What is that structure?
Temporomastoid fascia. Temporoparotid fascia.
Yes, parotid fascia. So this is one of the extension of the deep fascia. That you incise along the posterior border and then gradually go deeper. So that fascia is very tough.
Is there any vessel which will tell you that yes, you are about to reach the facial nerve?
Posterior auricular artery.
Posterior auricular artery.
Because it will enter into the stylomastoid foramen while
there is an Indian name related to the anatomy. Can I miss that? I forget the name. There is a gentleman related to that. So what is that name? Artery of?
No, I don't know.
I forget that name. He has identified a branch, and due to that, that is a.
So this artery, it gets into the same foramen, right, through which the facial nerve is coming out. So obviously, it is very closely opposed to the facial nerve, right? So in most cases, if you can find this artery, it is better to ligate the artery and then proceed, right? Otherwise, there will be a lot of bleeding. So that is another point which tells you how to reach the facial nerve. Okay. So now when you reach the facial nerve, then what to do?
So separate the gland from the facial nerve up to the till the exit points of the branch.
How do you do that?
So
you got the trunk, and then what happens to the trunk after exit?
So it will divide into the two major branches.
Yes.
Zygomatic-temporal and cervico-facial.
Yes.
So we have to go within the gland and now with the curved hemostatic forceps, and this with sharp dissection, you have taken bites of parotid tissue. You have to cut until the anterior border, till the exit point of the nerves we reached.
Yeah.
So what is the length of the trunk of the facial nerve before it divides into two?
So 1 to 2 centimeters.
Is around 1 to 1.5 centimeters, right? It is a thick nerve. That is something you have to remember, and it is very difficult to miss, right? I haven't seen anybody accidentally or somehow they have divided the facial nerve. That is something which almost never occurs, right? Until and unless you are dealing with a pathological condition like a malignancy or something else. A small question here. When are you permitted to divide the facial nerve?
So if it is a tumor involving that facial nerve, we can.
Anything else? Now here I think everybody needs to know that the facial nerve can only be divided when it is already paralyzed, right? So before you operate, if you find that the facial nerve is involved, in other words, you have all features, all if not all, at least a few features of facial nerve palsy, and obviously you're dealing with a malignant condition. Only in that case you are allowed to divide the facial nerve. In all other conditions, you have to make and take all efforts, to preserve the facial nerve, right? Even if it is encircled by a malignant tumor, but there is no facial palsy, even then you are supposed to preserve the facial nerve. You may have to scrape out malignant tissue from around the nerve surface. Even then, it is mandatory that you preserve the facial nerve. In case you find that is not possible, in that case, what are you supposed to do? You have to make all efforts for a nerve grafting, right? And what is the best nerve you have?
Great auricular nerve.
Great auricular nerve. You are supposed to use that nerve for nerve grafting. Yes, under a microscope or whatever it needs to be done, right? So that is sure that even if it is malignancy, you have to make all efforts to preserve the facial nerve. Okay, let's proceed. So you have what is called pes anserinus in front of you. Okay. So now what do you do? As you said, there are two main branches, right? The one which is going up is called the
Zygomatico-temporal and cervico-facial nerve.
Okay. The superior branch supplies
Zygomatico.
What are the branches?
Zygomaticus temporalis buccal branch.
The buccal comes from the lower one, and the certain other branches from the lower one is
marginal mandibular and cervical. Buccal,
marginal mandibular and cervical. Yes. Fine. So they have to be traced, and they have to be followed down into because one thing you have to remember that very rapidly this nerve becomes superficial within the parotid gland. So you have to be very careful when you are dividing the glandular tissue in between these branches, right? So they rapidly become superficial. And in all cases, you don't have to do a complete dissection. That is, you don't have to remove all glandular tissue that is superficial to it. Our main aim is to remove the tumor with some amount of normal tissue all around it, right? So in most cases, you will not need to do you don't have to remove the whole of the gland which is superficial to the nerve. Yes, what else? You have removed the gland, and now what?
So closure, check for hemostasis, whether in.
Yes, how would you perform hemostasis here?
So I will see for if any bladder is there, and try to cauterize with a bipolar.
Yes, you have to use a bipolar because that will minimize
the risk.
Any risk of coagulative injury to the nerve. Okay. Yes. After that, remove the gland, and now you have you will undertake some.
What about duct? Parotid duct.
Parotid duct is ligated in the.
Why do you find a parotid duct?
So in between anterior border of the parotid, anterior border of parotid, in between
Anterior border of
parotid.
masseter. You in the masseter muscle, and you find the duct between the two buccal branches. You have two nerve branches above and below, and find the parotid duct. So while doing superficial parotid, you need to ligate the parotid duct.
What is the superficial marking of the parotid duct?
If you mark from the surface, angle of mouth and
angle of mouth and tragus,
yes.
lateral 2/3 and medial 1/3 junction.
Exactly. So, okay, and usually it is very rarely that we will search for the parotid duct and ligate it, right? In most surgeons usually don't bother for the parotid duct. Anyway, theoretically you are supposed to do that. Anyway, next what is done?
So,
the whole area is irrigated with normal saline. Fine. Next, after that,
drains.
You have to put in a drain. Okay, fine. What kind of drain are you going to use?
Closed section drain.
We will use a closed section drain, a fine closed section drain. Yes. Next, what?
And a closure of the skin flaps that we raised.
Closure of the skin flaps. Before that, you want to do anything? Before closing the flap, do you want to do anything? There is a condition called Fraze syndrome. Yeah, what is that?
Due to the, if any arteriotemporal nerve is a parasympathetic nerve supplied to the parotid gland, if it got injured during the parotidectomy, there is rerouting of these parasympathetic fibers to the sympathetic supply of the skin over the parotid region. So there is gustatory hyperesthesia and swelling over them.
Yes,
so to avoid this,
how does it occur?
Rerouting of the parasympathetic fibers of the to these.
I mean, what is the mechanism? That is what I want to know.
So usually, arteriotemporal nerve is parasympathetic nerve supplied to the parotid gland. It causes, and so if it was injured during that, in stage of regrowth, it gets mixed with the sympathetic supply of the skin over the parotid regions. So whenever it gets, whenever
so
during
how can we prevent that?
So if you prevent that by keeping a flap between the parotid region and the skin, like sternomastoid, digastric.
So that means we have to use some mechanism by which the divided parotid tissue does not come in direct contact with the skin flap, right? Yes. According to some, most books have actually mentioned that very frequently, but it is not that frequent complication to occur. But even in that case, there is no harm in knowing what needs to be done, right? Thing is, we can take a muscle flap, or we can take a fascia from the sternomastoid, and you put it on the gland tissue that you have divided. Number one, or you can use some synthetic material in the form of ACD. That is, yes, exactly. A cellular dermal matrix can be placed there, and after that you repair the flap. Right. So you will have to put in a physical barrier between the skin and the glandular tissue. Okay. Now suppose you have made a drain, made some form of a drainage, and in the first 24 hours you find there is hardly anything coming. What do you do next? On the second day, do you remove the drain?
So 24 to 48 hours. If it is less than 25, we will.
No, the thing is, in this condition, in this operation, it is natural that you will be having some salivary secretion, which may not be obvious in the first 24 hours. So it is better if you can persist with the drain for a couple of days more, right? Otherwise, some saliva is going to collect inside. So even in the first 24 hours you don't have much drainage, you wait for another day or two before you finally remove the drain. Okay, fine. Yes, Makunda?
Yeah, I think we have covered well. We can have some part on, you said the secretive fibers of the parotid gland. What is the root of origin of fibers? Secretive fibers to parotid?
It's from inferior salivary nucleus.
Yes.
Glossopharyngeal nerve.
Invasive to glossopharyngeal nerve.
And it gives the tympanic branches. It forms the tympanic plexus. From there, lesser petrosal superficial nerve.
Lesser superficial petrosal nerve.
It joins with it enters into the otic ganglion. From there, postganglionic
fibers. Yeah. Postganglionic fibers.
Go along that.
Auriculotemporal.
Auriculotemporal.
What's the artery name? Okay. I think we have covered this. This is more of a short case, so it is about 10-minute discussion for the exam. So basically, one should keep in mind that you should talk of the parotid anatomy and then the examination of the facial nerve, and always you should include that part in the history also, that we have inquired about symptoms of facial nerve palsy. Otherwise, the presentation was good. Thank you, Dr.
Presentation was very good, and there's a small advice that next time when we have an operative discussion,
we'll
in some operative slides. It's better to talk with the slide on. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any question from any of the audience? Actually, I am not getting feedback from other participants for BNB students.
Yeah, we have had very few participants. How many? 10 or 15, I suppose.
Sir,
here we have 8.
8. I see.
We have 8 in the MR Bangalore.
And what about Sukumarda and Onadida? They are not there today?
They sometimes comes. Otherwise, we have about 50 to 20 online, and we have about 8 here in the MR Bangalore. So that comes on 25 to 30 students. So I am expecting.
Sir, one question, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir, extracapsular dissection, sir. I want to know if there's some information, sir, how to proceed and what are the steps in extracapsular dissection.
Yeah, extracapsular dissection is it has come up in the books. Definitely, it is there. But till date, I have not performed any such extracapsular dissection. As I said, right, and not a very popular operation yet. I don't know what Makunda wants to say about
actually, that. You see, extracapsular means I try to understand. The carotid has got two capsules. One is the true capsule which invades the parenchyma, and you have the external parotid mesenteric fascia. We call that as false capsule. And while doing a superficial parotidectomy, basically thing is, if there is an adenoma, you don't enucleate the adenoma. The point is, you make tunnels. You make tunnel with hemostatic forceps between the nerve and the superficial parenchymal tissue. It's not that you are taking this nodule out. So that is the operation where you make a tunnel between the nerve and the parenchyma and take all the parenchymal tissue out. So it's not exactly described as extracapsular operation.
The problem is there. We start doing that without identifying the trunk of the facial nerve, right? So that I think is not a very good explanation. I mean, not a very good way of doing it, right? So superficial parotidectomy is, I think, possibly the gold standard regarding benign swellings in the parotid gland and also for low-grade malignancies of the parotid gland. So I think it is best to perform this operation. And I'm not very comfortable with what you have just now said, that where we use just a small hemostat.
Well described.
Yeah, that is how it is described in the book. You are correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.